everybody, and welcome to Environmental Storytelling, a familiar world you never knew. That is a very long way of saying that we're going to be talking today about environmental storytelling and how immersive environments can add to the narrative of a video game. I'm Erica Ishii. I am a voice actor and a host. You've heard my voice as Anna Bray in Destiny 2, Amanda in Dream Daddy. I worked with Geek and Sundry, Nerdist, and I've had the great fortune of working and getting to sit down and have conversations with many people in this wonderful, wonderful industry that I've been fortunate enough to work in as well. Today, I am joined by three gentlemen who are in different aspects of game development and all have some really, really fascinating things to say about how they contribute to storytelling. So why don't we all introduce ourselves, starting with Glen?
Well, hi, Erica. How are you? I appreciate being on here. My name is, Glen Schofield, and I'm the CEO and game director for Striking Distance Studios. Um, I have been in games for about 30 years now, and yeah, I know that dates me. I started out as an artist. I still paint all the time, and I started out at Absolute Entertainment, which we did a lot of cartoony games such as The Simpsons and Ren and Stimpy and Rocky and Bullwinkle. Um, I came out to California to start working at Capcom. Spent a couple of years there, and then moved on to Crystal Dynamics, where that's where I started really directing games and directed games such as Gex 2 and Gex 3 and um Legacy of Kain, amongst many others. Then I got the call from EA, which was right up the street from us, and that felt like we were starting to play with the big boys. And I directed games such as Knockout Kings. Was a producer, did all the levels for Return of the King. Directed a James Bond game, and then I was the creator and director for Dead Space, and that was a wonderful game for me. Um, then I decided it was time to start my own studio, so I co-founded Sledgehammer Games, where I directed three Call of Duty games: Modern Warfare 3, Advanced Warfare, and World War II. After taking a little break from games, just about a year off, I started Striking Distance Studios, where we are working on a narrative-based game, uh, semi in the PUBG universe.
Right, and Glen can't quite talk about any of what he's working on currently. We're going to talk about his incredible history in games and the contributions he's made there. Right, we live in a world of NDAs, so we'll be respectful of that.
Thank you.
Um, Tate, please go ahead.
My name is Tate Mosesian. I've also been working on games for a while. I think I started in 1991 at Disney, making CD-ROM games. Then moved to a company called Adrenaline, where we did Spider-Man and X-Men for the SNES and Genesis. From there, went to Capcom, and then from Capcom went to Crystal Dynamics. Also worked on a game called Gex with Glen, actually. And then from there went to Sony, 989. Worked on a few games there, and then came down with a group of people to start the Santa Monica studio for Sony Santa Monica. Spent a few years there, and then went to Naughty Dog. Spent about 17 years at Naughty Dog. Started on Jak and Daxter 2, did Jak and Daxter 3, Jak X, we don't need to talk about that. Then also Uncharted, Uncharted 2, Uncharted 3, Uncharted 4, and art directed Lost Legacy. Was lead artist on the other Uncharted projects, and texture artist on Uncharted 2. Like Glen. I took a break for about a year and a half after that, and came back, and now I'm art directing at Survios.
Great. And because we can talk a little bit about what you're doing at Survios. You can touch on that. Yeah, congratulations, you guys are in the home stretch.
Yeah, we're very close.
I don't think we said on Walking Dead. We're Walking Dead Onslaught. Great. And Dave, last but not least, Dave, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, let's see. Well, I'm Dave Bennett. I'm a senior game designer at Schell Games. I've only been doing this for, I guess, 8 years now. So, you know, I'm basically a baby. But let's see. So basically at Schell Games, I actually started as an engineer. So I actually worked on programming a bunch of prototypes in Flash and Unity and a bunch of just other random things. But at Schell, we work on a lot of weird and wild stuff for both our own purposes and like client projects. So it ranges from like educational games to location-based entertainment where you pretend you're a super spy in a museum and you run around like looking for hidden exhibits and stuff like that. We also work with like VR, AR, and other like technology that is totally prototype and not at all with a name, and also heavily under NDA. So, you know, that's fun. But I've had the opportunity to work on a variety of different titles as both a project director and design director. A project director at the studio is kind of like somewhere between a creative director and also a producer, but also everything in between, like kind of the glue that sticks in between all the different disciplines and kind of like guides the boat. And more recently, we've been working on a game called Until You Fall, which is a VR hack and slash sword fighting game set in a neon environment with a synthwave soundtrack and weird glowing nights. Yeah. big mood. And yeah, but even before that, I've had a variety of opportunities to work on other VR titles. Some are, again, prototypes. Other things I've worked on is like choose your own space comedy adventure like Orion Trail, where it's like basically just a joke factory. But what's interesting is that each of these different things that we've worked on, we actually carry forward into the different projects. So through this variety of weird projects that we all work on, we actually kind of bring it into each of our new projects going forward.
Right. And did I hear right that you all do internal game jams somewhat regularly?
Yeah.
Those projects?
Yeah, no, every year, except for this year, because, you know, thanks COVID, we tend to try to do week-long, jam weeks. And the idea is that the entire studio, like, we make time for it. We work with our clients to let them know, like, hey, we're going to sit down and spend a week to basically spend time just trying weird stuff. It could be personal development. It could be basically pitching ideas to the studio of like, hey, I want to make this thing and I want to make a prototype to kind of prove out this concept. And several games, including Orion Trail and I Expect You to Die, started off as prototypes through this Jam Week process. And so it's been, I don't know, it's wild. Like, I think last year I did something just really simple where it's like, oh, I want to make a fun dice roller where it plays ska when you roll the dice. And like that was about so it can be as grand or as simple as you want, but it's a really nice way, especially during a project or longer projects, to kind of like have a reset button to just like try stuff that you don't normally get to do.
Right. And for those who are not familiar with the term game jams are usually where a group of developers will get together and have a time limit in which they are a time limit to create a game. And it could be like 48 hours or as in this case, a week. And you sort of just get to get wild and experimental. And they're really a great way if you're looking to get into game development to sort of meet others and collaborate, learn new skills, like get ideas out on paper. There's a lot of local ones, like you should check online and see if there's any local ones where you are. But so environmental storytelling, I guess we should start out. I sort of touched on it in the beginning, how it's all the elements of the game sort of feed into storytelling, but how would you say, how would you define it? Let's start with Glen. How have you dealt with environmental storytelling in your career?
Well, gosh, it started years ago when, you know, we would be, you know, just use a kitchen, for example. We would be doing a kitchen in a game, and we would put down, you know, 5 5 chairs and at the table, and 5 empty plates and some silverware. And it got to a point where it was like, it doesn't tell anything about the people that ate there. What did they eat? How many, what kind of food? Were they in the middle of the food? Did they clean up the dishes? It always looked the same. So we wanted to start telling stories like, well, they were in the middle of spaghetti, and they had to leave, and there were 7 of them, and 3 of them had finished eating, and the others hadn't. And it's a way that by putting some environmental storytelling around, you can tell more about your characters, you can tell more about your world, you can tell more about your story, by just putting these details all throughout your game.
And it's interesting that you bring that up, that in the beginning it's sort of like was very simplistic, and then you're like, what can we add to it, what can we layer on, because most of the times at a game studio, the assets that you create, like, they are kind of recycled from other projects and stuff, so you have to kind of see what you have in your library. Like Tate, I know at Naughty Dog they have like an asset library, right? Oh, you're muted, sorry.
I had to mute myself. They do now, but for years we did. For years we actually made everything from scratch for every game, and shared very little, to be honest. Mainly for in large part due to the fact that the Uncharted games all took place in different parts of the world. So you might have a game where you're in the desert, you're in the snow, and you're in some ruins somewhere, all in the same game, and then the next game you do, none of those environments are there. So it wasn't until the Last of Us that we really started developing libraries, because the scenes shared a lot of visual language, whereas in the Uncharted games, there was a lot of variety. So I painted a lot of brick walls in mine.
Just a lot of different, like, sandy brick walls and snowy brick walls, and
storytelling, exactly, right? So based on the materials that you're using in something as simple as a brick wall, you are actually conveying.
So all of you work in different aspects of game development, but how does your specific role impact environmental storytelling? Dave, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I mean, so it's weird. Like, as the project director, I work with my other team of directors. We have an art director, a design director, a tech director. And so working with my art director and the design director, we kind of come up with like, okay, well, what is the world that we're telling here? And I guess for Until You Fall, which is the thing I've been working on for 2 years now, so it's the best example / most fresh. But the idea is that, all right, so what is the game? And for Until You Fall, we actually really started with like, what's the power fantasy? And like, what is the important thing that the player should be feeling? What is the emotion? And for Until You Fall, that was like, okay, you are a badass knight. That is the fantasy. That is what you are. You are not a weak squire becoming a knight. You are a badass knight becoming a literal sword god. And so with that as their tone target, we then started building up everything else around it. So it's like, okay, well, what's the world? What does this place look like? Early on, we kind of come up with the concept of like a kind of a magical apocalypse. And so it's like, okay, well, what does that mean? What does that look like? What were these people? What we have a lot of cool looking assets that are like kind of these glowy knights. What is that? How do they become glowy knights? Were they born that way? Were they transformed? Were they turned against their will? And so like there's a lot of questions that we start kind of building up for this and building up a world around those to answer those questions, some directly, some indirectly. And so each decision was kind of, again, rooted in the power fantasy aspect of it. But like, to make you feel powerful in the game, we wanted to lean into music that drove you forward. And so like when you say environmental storytelling, like usually you think of like a physical environment, but I guess to me it really is more of the holistic picture. And so again, like, because I'm looking at it as the project director, it's like trying to figure out how all the different elements can kind of feed together to like make the game feel the way we want you to. So it is the environment. It's a neon looking environment with a synthwave soundtrack with glowy knights, and everything is pushing you forward to keep fighting and get to the next encounter. Stuff like that.
Right. So early on, were there sort of meetings to get everybody on board for like, this is the aesthetic? Do you have like a Pinterest board or?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Like it was like Until You Fall, like originally it was a straight fantasy game. It was just like, all right, well, we got these cool knights. They're kind of like got this like kind of glowy innards. That's kind of cool. And, like we quibbled about details, but eventually like the thing that really kind of actually unified the style and the kind of environment and everything else about the game was the music. And so we decided like, all right, screw it. We know we have fantasy knights right now, but you know what? Music really gets you into like a fighting mood, like preparing for violence. It's synthwave. So let's really push into that. And that informed like making the environments more neon. It pushed the knights to be more neon, which pushed the music to be more synthwavy. And then that kind of like created this feedback loop where we really just kind of, I don't know, made everything super glowy.
Wow. That's cool. That's cool how like one aspect of the storytelling can just so impact everything else in this loop.
Yeah.
Glenn, so as game director, it's like you have to sort of oversee all the different departments and aspects of like art and design and game and music and Foley, just all the different aspects of that. So how do you manage what is the pipeline for that?
Well, I think we have there's many pipelines that all kind of come in together, and a lot of it starts with, because I think because my background is in art, a lot of it starts with concept art. And you talked about Pinterest boards, and we start with those, but we have, any of the Call of Duty games, we had anywhere between 10 and 15 concept artists just cranking out concept art. And that would kind of really get the team going, right? We could put music to concept art. We could, even the game designers, even though they're designing sort of on their own, they get to look at the boards as well, and that will help design, help inform design. So I actually like when art informs design and design informs art. I like that go between all of them and how they inform each other, not just one leading the way.
Yeah. So has that been sort of your ethos for across all of your years in game development, like because you came from art?
Yes, and there are times where I have to kind of scale back a little bit, because I will lead with art a lot. You know what I mean? And so there are times where I'm like, okay, hold on, let's let design lead this way. And even meetings that I'm having these days, like even today, I had one today where in concept art we're trying to design something out, and I'm like, well, hold on, let's get the design team in here, let them design it out, and then we'll concept from there. Because there's I have this sometimes I want to design everything in concept art, but it can't be done that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think for those that are not as intimately familiar with the game development process, in some ways we think, or people think of it like different roles as like on a film set, where there's like an editor that does something almost entirely different from the director, that does something entirely different from the actor, and they all work together, but the aspects of their job don't quite lean on each other the way that like design and art and dialogue and writing all sort of have to really rely on each other for game dev. But yeah, so it's interesting to see like which ones at which studios and on which projects lead,
That's always the hard part, I guess. Like, I just to chime in on that, because it's like like Glenn was kind of hinting at, like I came from an engineering background, so originally I was much more like, all right, how do we build this? What's the only way we can build this? And so like knowing when to break out of that mindset and knowing when to I don't know, lean on your teammates. Like, again, like you were working with super talented and awesome folks, and just because like now that like in the position that I'm in, it's like, okay, really easy to try to lean on, well, I have to do it this way because I know that it's cheaper to build it this way, is not always the right answer. Like making sure that you work and like consider the options through all the different lenses is super important.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, Tate, when I got a chance to demo Walking Dead Onslaught, and when I played it, it was a lot more sort of shooting gallery style, you know, and just like more, I guess, more mechanics driven. But since then, the game has been revamped to be a lot more story driven. You know, what's the process for that look like?
Well, I mean, yeah, that's an interesting question. You know, the story generally starts with narrative and design. And art will be called in occasionally for input. I would agree with Glenn in that it's always best when all of the disciplines get together and collaborate sort of as equals. Oftentimes, you can get into a rut as a team where one discipline will not be communicating with the other. That's when you have to kind of get everybody back together and sort of on the same page and working towards the same goal. So when that story, I actually wasn't at Survios when the shift was made towards more story driven. I got there sort of after the story had been down, but then was required to sort of support it with the vision. So that is what we do actually with the visuals. Is everything we do is there to support the gameplay, number one, and then the story. And if we're, you know, if that is our focus, then ultimately we'll have this kind of really cohesive experience for the player.
Right.
Yeah, I should.
Oh yeah, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was gonna just say I need to backtrack for a second because although we start off with concept art, we're usually starting with the story, and the story then dictates what the concept art is in many cases, and then we so I apologize for that, but yeah, we will lead with story and design, which are kind of really linked together, and then but we do tons and tons of concept art. We concept art everything out now these days.
And I would double down on that too. I think it's extremely important to have that foundation. It gives the artist confidence. It also inspires the team when they see it. And it
Absolutely.
does spur a lot of ideas within design or even within other elements of the development, like VFX and sound. And, you know, when the whole team is kind of ripping off this visual, which is concept, the ideas really start.
Yeah, we'll even concept art VFX and things like that. Now, you know, what does the smoke look like? What do the sparks look like? And so because there's so many different types of smoke, so many different types of sparks, right? And so we'll make sure that even that gets a start. Obviously, it gets a lot better when it's in the artist's hands, but yeah, we'll concept art whatever we can. And Tate's right. I mean, it just spurs ideas from design to engineering on you know, gameplay and gameplay ideas. Because I'll be honest, from my point of view, I don't care where the big idea comes from. I look at all the people on the team as game makers, not necessarily, oh, you're an artist or you're a technologist. You're a game maker first. And so we don't care where the best idea comes from.
In terms of game story, like how much do you start with? Like at our studio, we tend to definitely start with more mechanics focused, and we at the very we tend to come up with the idea for what the concept of the mechanics are, and again, kind of as far for the story we go maybe to the player fantasy, and then have enough of the scaffolding for the world and story around that to support that. So I'm curious, I know for me, I would love, usually it's just a matter of how much time we have. We tend to work in teams that are much smaller. Like a big team at Schell is 20 people. And so we are very used to very small, rapid iteration. And so it's just I'm always just fascinated to hear the differences.
I think,
Go ahead, Tate.
Okay. I think that's smart game making, right? Starting with mechanics and figuring out what's just fun with the bare minimum. That is essential. That is sort of the idea. And then you can kind of build off of that. You can then build your story from that. And then you can start drilling down on graphics. At a studio like Naughty Dog, though, where you kind of, they're very narrative-driven games, and particularly when you're doing, let's say, the sequels, and you know what your mechanics are. Then it's usually the story, and then and design, and then we'll meet the art team will meet with story and design and start figuring out locations and set pieces and things like that.
And a game like Call of Duty starts with, I mean, because the main mechanic is shooting. The single player will start off with, a story. We'll have a story of like locations or what time period it is. Mechanics follow right after that, because you just don't. You have to have different types of shooting, and you gotta have different types of gameplay. Like in Advanced Warfare, we added the boost jump, which was a major game changer for the game, and so that came relatively early. But Call of Duty will have a story as well as gameplay mechanics, right from the get-go.
I want to jump in and say one of my favorite sort of like beautiful marriages of gameplay and storytelling was in Uncharted 4 in the attic, doing the target practice in the attic, and like you're looking around at all the different relics from the previous games to sort of like catch you up on the story, and then sort of like teaching you the mechanics of how to shoot with using Nerf guns in the attic.
Yeah. I mean that we were lucky there. Obviously, with Uncharted 4, we had this rich history of a decade of games, and a whole lot of different places we could go. And then the relics in the attic, calling back to all of those, and that game was a game where we all had a special place in our hearts for that one, because it was the last. And we did want to call back to the the history of the game and also the characters within the game. And the epilogue of that was also really touching at the end of the game.
Yeah.
But it was a fun moment in the attic, for sure.
There's so environmental storytelling incorporates like specific cues that through different aspects of development you use to tell the player what to do without explicitly saying it. And Glen, one of my favorite examples in gaming of that was the graffiti in Dead Space.
Oh yes, cut off their limbs. Yeah. It not only told the story, but it told you about the main mechanic as well. That's come back many times. People ask me about that one, and it was just almost out of necessity that we needed to do that, just to let people know what to do. But it just turned out, being that we did it in the environment, was just, it felt so natural for the player then after that. Just to they just kind of went through the game. They didn't have to be told. Here it was in bold in the game, and so it just worked out really well.
And Dave, I feel like the medium of VR especially needs a lot of those sort of like integrated cues, because VR is still such a sort of like in a tech demo-y state where like people don't always know how to move or like where to look, and you have to like find ways of getting them to like turn around at this certain point or like know how to shoot in this certain way.
Oh yeah, for sure. And like a lot of the it all stems from the fact like, okay, well, the player's face is the camera and you don't know where they're going to be looking. And so the really frustrating part is that like, yeah, a lot of tricks that you usually rely on is like, oh, we're going to guide the camera over here to make you look at that thing. And it's like, no, you can't do that because we have no idea where you're going to be looking. And on top of that, there's also just the added risk of, well, okay, will this make the player sick? So there's just so many things that like you're like, okay, well, we think we can do this. We think we can catch your attention with this bright flashing thing, but does that cause motion sickness? If that causes motion sickness, can we do that? If we can't do that, what's the alternate means? And so really, it's kind of like figuring out all of the different things. So kind of like it's not quite as blatant as like graffiti on the wall, but like at a certain point in our game, we had there are basically these giant crystals at the end of each levels, where they look kind of ominous, they're glowy, and you need to approach them to get your loot, because that's just the weird neon world we live in. And players just weren't getting it in playtesting, and so eventually we had our kind of narrator tutorial character just straight up say, "Approach the bloom." And that was enough. And at that point on, they do it the first time and they learn that behavior. And some people remember that they were told to do it, other players don't, and think they just figured it out. And so something that's great about the entire environmental storytelling is that it creates opportunities for the player to either feel clever, or they discovered a secret or something, even if it's very intentionally placed there.
Some of my favorite environmental instructions are from Portal. It's just it's like straight up the little man doing the actions, or like the Ratman scrawl with pointers, or GLaDOS talking you through it, but she's an unreliable narrator. I love that aspect of it. And Tate, you were talking the other day about lighting in Walking Dead. That was really, really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I actually talk a little bit about what you just said. Also, like in the Uncharted games, we actually got a little bit slammed over things like our yellow pipes or our white ledge grab. In that sense, those aren't as much storytelling as they are information, right? And they give you the information to navigate through the world. And if you can attach a story to that, then you're in good shape. Sometimes it's hard to do that, and you just sort of hang a lantern on it and you go for it. Yeah, in Walking Dead, there's a hub level. It's Alexandria from the movie, and when we revamped and brought in the story, the idea is that you're starting out in Alexandria fresh, and you're building up Alexandria. And some of the cues that we were getting for the fact that the world is starting to get flushed out, as you go and you do your scavenger missions and whatnot, you level up and you're building Alexandria. One of the cues we're using is lighting the interiors of buildings and because of that, then we needed a darker environment to support that. So we decided to set the time of day in the morning, sort of just before the sun breaks the horizon. That allowed us to put a nice fire there. Our palettes very, very warm, and creates a sense of safety and comfort and calmness, which is what Alexandria is supposed to do. It's the only place you feel safe in the game. And so one thing sort of feeds the other, and the needs of design, which was we need to express this space developing, then leads into finding a good time of day to support that, and then building even further off of that, create an even safer feeling with the environment.
Right. So like a mechanic sort of ended up leading into atmosphere.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool. So there, we talk about all these things and like all of these sort of problems that need to be solved with environmental storytelling, in whatever aspect of game development that may be. But are there aspects that in your guys' career that you have, like really smart problems that you've solved that you feel like were overlooked or you haven't gotten to talk about ever?
Well, I can tell you, I'm not sure this is necessarily a problem or not, but in the Call of Duty games, you need to get it right. And I'll give you an example, like a submarine. We can't get it wrong because we'll hear about it. And so we go to like crazy lengths. Like I went on a 6-day trip when we made World War II to all the locations in Europe where the game was going to be. And I mean, it was 6 or 7 days, 14-hour days in a van with like 3 other people where we go to these places. We were in foxholes in 5 feet of snow. We were in Blizzard in Belgium, going through the woods. But that was perfect because that's what it was like during that time. I went into museums so that we could just take hundreds and hundreds of pictures of probably thousands of pictures of everything that was used in World War II, because there's some great museums out there. But we went to locations that I had no idea existed, and or still existed, but there's still remnants of it. And we would go to unbelievable lengths. And even in the game I'm working on now, or even in Dead Space, you try and get it as realistic as possible. And there are times when you just really, really have to research a crazy amount just to get it right. And I think those are details that people don't always pick up on, but they take it for granted that you've done your homework and that you've gotten it right.
So if you've gotten it right, people won't notice it at all. But boy, if there's one thing we nerds love, it's being pedantic about wrong details.
Oh yeah, I'll hear about it. Let me tell you.
Dave,
it's going to bring a level of authenticity to the game. It's just going to happen naturally, right? I mean, I have not had the opportunity to do that kind of music. I wish I had. It's certainly nowhere near as it's actually way better than the Google searches. Obviously, it's definitely a way to go. We had some people go to Nepal during Uncharted 2 and came back with a lot of photographs. And, that's obviously better than just doing standard Google search as well. But to be there, to feel it, touch it, and to just sort of know it firsthand is definitely.
We would go. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dave.
Oh no, I mean it's funny because coming from, especially for like working on games that don't have real world analogs, like yes, there are forests, but that's about it. And so trying to basically, I guess what's interesting for us, and again, we're kind of leaning on other experiences I've worked on, is that in order to make comfortable environments, especially for VR, we actually lean a lot on our location-based experience. So like, hey, what practices work for theme parks? What practices work for basically like OSHA standards almost? Like, what is a comfortable distance that like these hallways need to be so that you can understand that this is a space that you can walk through? And so, well, it's not exactly like going to specific locations, but like building physical and again, location-based experiences directly translates to building experiences for VR.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Glenn, you were gonna jump in on something?
Well, it's going back to the other thing is where we would go to such expense as to, if there were places and that we couldn't get to, we would hire location based photographers to go in and get as many photos as we could. There are some places where they don't want video game makers in, such as a power plant or anything. So we'd have to kind of hide it a little bit and get a photographer to go in for us. We go spare any expense. Now, of course, that's depends on the budget of your game, but there are some that you just have to get it right.
Yeah, it's interesting because all the little details sort of go into whether they notice it or not, whether gamers notice it or not, to like making the world feel well-rounded and immersive and like giving them different cues. I have a friend who she's a costumer. She's a modeler at Blizzard, but she's also a costumer, and so they'll consult her whenever they're building the cinematic trailers. They'll be like, hey, can you build us this actual costume so we see how the fabric drapes, so we like can see the texture of it, so we like see the weight, and how it hangs, and it just like sort of all combines to sort of create these worlds that we can live in for 80 hours at a time. But we were also talking yesterday a little bit about game feel, and like how important and that is to the gameplay experience. So Dave, can you just sort of like walk us through game feel? You had a good definition yesterday.
Sure. I mean, yeah. I mean, for Until You Fall, so much like this game again. We lean a lot on power fantasy or like the player fantasy, and again, you're supposed to feel powerful, and so, all the elements that we're working on. So like, go right down to the handling of the sword. Like, we put a lot of work and time into making it like the swords feel like they have weight, because again, like in VR, weightless objects just, I don't know, detract from the immersion of the experience. And so even starting with that and looking at the different ways to make you feel powerful, like, all right, well, what makes you want to swing swords? And it's like, okay, well, let's look for music that, you know, makes you feel powerful. And kind of like I mentioned at the top, like, all right, let's lean into this synthwave feeling, because again, it's kind of got these great, it's got this driving beat where you're involuntarily bobbing your head, you're preparing for violence, and it really leans in, it encourages you to get into the action, to get into the fight, to really start swinging your swords. And the other aspects of it, like, we do a lot of subtle things. So like, it's in the environment, we give enough space to go through things, to, you know, fight dudes. That's obviously part of it. But the other things include, like, we try to oh, go ahead.
Right, the haptic feedback on the controller.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Like, it's the haptic feedback, the sounds, the visual effects, like everything going into that just really feeds into the making you feel powerful. Like, I think one of the things that someone called out in one of our reviews, which is great, is like when you hit a big swing, and like we basically grade your swing strength based on not how fast or hard you're doing it, but kind of how wide. Because we found that wider swings not only track better for the hardware because it's VR, but it's also like you feel cooler and you look cooler doing it. Like, people watching you play actually see you like, oh, you're making these big grand gestures and you are getting into the combat. And so to reward that, you do more damage. But we also play basically like the Super Smash Brothers like home run bat noise. So you get this like really satisfying kapwing every time you hit, like you get like a perfect crit.
Yeah.
And so we really just kind of like lean into that and encourage you to really like go into that. And so eventually, like, we put a lot of effort into making the best way to play the game the most fun and kind of like exciting way to both watch and play.
Yeah, for me, sound is a huge contributing factor to game feel. And like, again, game feel is like one of those things where it's just like, how do I feel when I play this? You know, it's like not, it's less about like, I mean, I guess it incorporates, you know, visuals and sound and just like every aspect of it. Oh, and by the way, haptic feedback is like the rumble of the controls and the movement of the controller. But it's, you know, sound, I think, is probably one of the most immersive elements for me. Like, I find that Nintendo is incredibly good at game feel. You know, their sort of like sounds like are so iconic and like make you feel good. Like when you hit a block in Mario, like the ding noise or like the explode, the crunch noise. And it all kind of like, it's interesting because it's not something that exists in any other medium.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean, trying to make a game like Dead Space is 50% audio. There's no doubt about it that you know, whether there was audio in a hallway or not, you still felt like there was something, right? And like, game feel for a horror game is like the complete opposite of making a Call of Duty game. Except there are areas in a Call of Duty game where you want to make the player feel scared, and you know, because war is scary, and so, but Dead Space was all about the feel. You know, can we make you feel scary for that amount of time? And it wasn't easy. And the other thing we had to do with Dead Space, we're getting back to environmental storytelling, is that in many places we had to try and tell you a story in front of you or to the side of you, but actually we were scaring you from another angle. And so that's where the environment really played a huge part in not only telling the story, but in getting that scare across.
Yeah, I think also being relatively new now and developing for VR, the sound plays a just in terms of informing the player where to go or what to do, plays a much larger role than, let's say, the traditional console games where sound is important, but now you're being drawn by sound.
Right, it's 360 degrees.
Yeah.
So it is becoming, within that medium, even more than it always has been.
Yeah, you need to know that there's literally a dude coming up behind you, and you need to know how to react to it, because you either hear the footsteps or you get a notification, but like that location bit, like the locational sound is like, yeah, it's super important.
Yeah, poor sound has always been kind of relegated to the end of the game, right?
And yeah,
yeah, we don't have much room left, let's put some sound in, but I learned early on with Dead Space, you can't do that. It's like at the core of that game, and actually Dead Space helped me with Call of Duty to let everyone know we are not waiting to the end to put the audio in. That's going in because whether you're in a battle scene or you're quietly in bunkers underground, it really changes the mood.
yeah. I mean, so much of the Until You Fall is about the music kind of driving the emotion. So again, like, we can't always have you just be full tilt all the time. Like, we wanted to have something where it's like, okay, no, this is a time where you can relax. And so, like, yeah, we have a hub where there's calmer music, but during a run, because it's a roguelite structure, basically there's a music track for leading up to combat. There's a music track for in combat. If you're getting your butt kicked, we kind of like slow things down to give you time to breathe. And if you're doing really well, we amp it up and make it more heroic. And then eventually you win and then get your rewards and you have no one to worry about. And so we kind of like lower the intensity again. And so both the sound and the music's a great way to kind of control the interest curve and kind of like the intensity of what the player should be feeling.
Absolutely.
Man, I could honestly talk about this all day, and like we've gotten to the point where we're just like kind of bouncing off of each other. I love just like I love these nerdy discussions. It's funny too, like hearing all this and like knowing all of the sort of background of what goes into development, because with me, my aspect of it is I am in a booth alone, sometimes just with a spreadsheet of lines without context. And I have to imagine, like, how far away am I from this person? Like, in addition to all the acting stuff, like, how do I feel about this person? Like, how far away am I from them? Is it raining right now? Do I have a gun? It's just like all of these sort of like environmental, aspects that I have to sort of integrate into a performance in my aspect of the storytelling. And it's a lot, but then sometimes you get stuff, like I said, if you get concept art, it's so, like, if you see the character or the environment you're in, that helps so much. Occasionally you'll get like sound cues or another actor's performance, or if you're familiar with the game, if you're working on an established franchise, and like I have the fortune of like knowing how gameplay works, like, is it first person or third person or top down? Just so much. And so from, a voice acting standpoint, a lot goes into the sort of storytelling there, other than just the actual dialogue that happens.
Go ahead. Oh, okay. I mean, it's interesting you say that, because at Naughty Dog, on the Uncharted and Last of Us games, we would do everything in a soundstage. So the actors would show up and we put them in the suits with little funny balls. And
for some of it. For the mocap, yes, but like when I did ADR for Last of Us, and that's just sort of in the booth. But even then, they like put you in there with other people, which is a rare treasure in voice acting.
And a lot of the dialogue is actually taken from those mocap sessions, and everything is sort of done in context. And they would even ask us to provide block mesh, or even even more fleshed out levels to build their stages before the actors got there. So in a lot of instances, they would actually have these mocked up stages that matched our environments, and so the actors were actually interacting with the stages as they were in the game.
Yeah, we would do the same, Tate. There's because we always found that we would get better performances out of people if they knew where they were going to be and what was going on. And what's great with performance capture is you can run a scene, and then you can show them what it looks like with their character in 3D. A few seconds later.
This is kind of a tangent, but the soundstage and actually building out the environment, a technique we used for I Expect You to Die to kind of build levels to before actually building puzzles and levels and mechanics and stuff like that is a technique we called brown boxing. And so we literally take cardboard boxes to build physical little sets of okay, well, what is this environment? This is the submarine. This is the submarine level. What is in reach of the submarine? So we physically build out the a cardboard version of it where people just pretend to play along. It's oh, okay, I pick up the phone. What do I hear? And yes, so it was a great kind of cost-effective way to rapidly iterate and try things. It's okay, well, I have a great idea for a puzzle. I'll build it with Amazon boxes and let's see if anyone can solve it. Oh, no one can solve it. Okay, let's just tear that one down and then change it because this thing's too close or too far. And again, it's the very physical nature of it where you can just get random people off the street or random people in the studio to just kind of sit down and try the thing.
That's it's 3D paper prototyping.
Exactly. Yeah. It was super helpful.
Paper prototyping is when you have sort of the story beats and how it's going to play, but just on paper. I did I had to do it was supposed to be a mocap job, but quarantine happened. So we walked out the beats and I recorded the sound in my booth and then acted out the scene in my living room here for the animator's reference. So they did that, and then they had a camera on me while I was doing my lines in the booth. And normally you have face markers for that, and just sort of all the text to capture all of the movements. But in this case, it was just sort of traditional 2D animation where it was just reference for animators. And it's amazing to see how we've sort of had to improvise for all the aspects of game dev and communication now in this brave new world.
Yeah, this is a weird time for everybody, but figuring out how to make a game this way, when traditionally your studio is not built to do it. I know there are a lot of studios out there that do sort of have remote people all over the place, but it's been a challenge for sure. Getting out of the studio and then trying to finish a game remotely.
Well, all the best to everybody. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful that games has been able to continue even in this age of the pandemic. I'm told we have to wrap up right now. So really quickly, where can people find you? Glenn, let's start with you. Or anything you want to promote?
Well, I want to promote Striking Distance Studios, and our website goes live, I think, in 3 days. So go to strikingdistancestudios.com to find out more. We are still hiring. We have been able to really hire quite well during COVID, but we still have a few more openings for our game. And look for us in the coming months when we announce our game.
I'm really excited for that. I hear that it is spectacular. Tate.
Yeah, well, the big news is that Walking Dead Onslaught is coming out within the next month for people to play, and we're just wrapping things up right now. That's the big news for us right now.
Congratulations. Dave.
Yeah, if you like swords and neon and synthwave, Until You Fall is currently on early access on Steam. So if you have a VR headset for your PC, you can get it now and play it and check it out and see if you like it. We are also coming to the PlayStation VR and Quest soon. I can't say quite yet when, but soon. So yeah, we'll be coming to those headsets as well. And yeah, just go check us out untilyouFall.com or go check out our Discord. We've got plenty of people that are talking about swords.
That's right up my alley. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining me and for this incredible discussion. More of this offline. I'm Erica Ishii. You can find me at Erica Ishii on Twitter and at the Erica Ishii on Instagram. I have a couple of really cool announcements like coming up in the next couple of months, so stay tuned for that. And thank you to everybody who made this panel happen. Enjoy the rest of your PAX.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.